Hi, good evening, everyone. And we are very excited to gather here this afternoon. And first off, by saying Happy Veterans Day. We did want to acknowledge that, but it also coincides with the beginning of Donor Sabbath, which is recognized by national donation organizations between November 11th through the 13th, typically 2 weekends before Thanksgiving. And National Donor Sabbath is faith organizations and faith-based leaders coming together to recognize the importance of organ donation within their communities and within the community as a whole. And today we are joined here with our fantastic panelists, and as this is hosted by Mid-America Transplant. And Mid-America Transplant serves about 4.7 million people within Southern Illinois, Missouri, and the northern part of Arkansas. And to kick it off, I would like to introduce our representatives who are joining us from the Southern Illinois region, Representative Latoya Greenwood and Senator Christopher Bell. Good evening, guys.
Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you for having us.
Yes. I am a State Representative Latoya Greenwood, and I represent the 114th District here in the Metro East area. And I am very honored this evening to share the screen with this awesome panel and to be able to offer information and to learn about organ and tissue donation this evening. So thank you for having me.
And I am Chris Belt. I am State Senator for the 57th District. Ever since we did the first one, I've really received great and positive feedback from that one. I received tons of phone calls. And so I really was looking forward to this one. As most would know or probably know, I'm a transplant survivor. I had a kidney transplant in 2010 because of hypertension. And so anything that we can do, that I can do to promote, to champion the cause of education around organ donation is something that I'm fully committed to. And as I always say, knowledge really is power. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. Now I want to introduce the rest of our panelists. I would like to start with Dr. Will Ross. If you could just give us a little background about yourself.
Sure, Corinne, thanks again for inviting me. And I agree, it's an honor to serve with this august panel. I am a professor of medicine in the kidney division at Washington University School of Medicine, Associate Dean for Diversity, and I oversee a number of our community partnership programs. But most importantly, I am a proud board member at Mid-America Transplant. I have been on the board of Mid-America since 1995, serving on a corporate board. And when we spun off our foundation, I served as president of our foundation, and I continue to serve as an active member of the Mid-America Transplant's Foundation Board of Directors. And I've been, since the early 90s, working on organ tissue transplantation for African Americans, starting with the NAACP program in 1991. So I've been at this for a while, and we've made some, we've had improvements, we've made some changes and how we see this, but there's a lot of work to do, and that's why I really, I'm supportive of this approach to really make sure that we can ensure that all African Americans have access to the life-saving transplantation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ross, for that introduction. We're very excited to have you here today. And next, I would like to introduce Jackie Burgess Bishop. Jackie, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, absolutely. Good evening, everyone. I'm Jackie Bishop. I am the CEO for the National Kidney Foundation of Illinois. Appreciative to Corinne and to Mid-America Transplant for including us in this really phenomenal panel this evening and the conversations that we're going to have and the education that's going to be imparted, and as well as the feedback. So the National Kidney Foundation of Illinois, we improve the lives of 4 persons at risk or impacted and affected by kidney disease. And we go through the entire continuum from prevention through transplantation and post-transplantation. So again, honored to be here.
Thank you. Awesome. And I'd like to move to Pastor Ron Young.
So as she just stated, I'm Pastor Ron Young of Impact Church St. Louis, serving the Metro East area of the St. Louis metropolitan community, which is on the Illinois side. And I am, and our church is an advocate for donorship. And we, through avenues such as this, are promoting the importance of donorship. And what does that mean for our community? And how does that affect those who are in the faith-based community as well? So as everyone else has stated, it is a pleasure to be here and excited to have this conversation.
Thank you so much. And moving on to Pastor Mcpherson, if you could give us a little background about yourself and your work with Mid-America.
Sure. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Pastor Anthony Mcpherson. I'm the proud pastor of Quinn Chapel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Jefferson City, Missouri. But I'm also the community engagement liaison with Mid-America Transplant. And so get to do the great work of telling people about the importance of organ donation and dispelling some of those misconceptions that people have. And so I am very delighted that you all are part of this discussion and look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Pastor Mcpherson. And then finally, Rabbi Jessica Shafran, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, we'd love to hear more.
Hi, I'm Rabbi Jessica Shafran. I am a rabbi and a board certified chaplain with Neshama Association of Jewish Chaplains, of which I sit on the board. And I'm currently the manager of pastoral care over at Cardinal Glennon Hospital, so part of the SSM system. And so I get to work on the patient side of transplant. And so it's just such an honor to be here and be part of this wonderful panel this evening. So thank you for including me.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. We have a great next hour of panelists answering questions and just talking about the intersection of health and faith and organ donation. I would first like to start out by saying, hi, I'm your moderator, Corinne. I'm sorry for not introducing myself sooner, but I'm going to be posing questions to our panelists, and we're going to have discussions about the idea behind organ transplant and how that intersects with faith, and just hearing about preventative care, conversations that you can have, and getting stories from our panelists and their experience within this field in particular. And starting off with Dr. Ross, just a couple of questions. And I know that this comes up constantly and you can never hear the answer to this too much, but can you give us more about organ donation? Who can donate and what organ donation means and the different kinds of organ donation? And then if anyone else wants to jump in as well, please feel free to.
Okay, for the next 2 hours, I'm going to be talking. Just kidding. So that's a long. It's a lot of to impart, but I'll do this briefly, a couple of minutes. Just saying that we recognize that individuals are going to be at risk of losing their organs for lots of reasons. And as a nephrologist, I see the most common cause of organ failure being the likelihood of developing diabetes and high blood pressure, causing kidney disease. There are 113,000 people on the waiting list. The overwhelming majority of those are waiting kidney transplants. And so we know that in-organ disease will lead to the need for organ transplantation. We also know that there are a number of individuals who have underlying health issues related to hepatitis C particularly, and who may have fatty liver disease and other complications that could lead them to having liver failure, requiring liver transplantation. And we clearly know that so many individuals have underlying heart disease and end-stage heart disease requiring a heart transplantation. The same, so those are the organs that you'll hear more about in terms of having the need. There are other organs that are transplanted less likely, less frequently, pancreas, gland, and others. But there are also tissues that are a critical part of this. Our lung, bones, skin for individuals who require skin grafts, and we have individuals who are living with eye disorders, and they can benefit from cornea transplants. And so, our full body is there for donation, and to transfer, to give life to individuals who need them. That's the need. This is, Corinne, this is particularly relevant here because which group of individuals in this country are more likely to develop these end-stage diseases? Yes, African Americans and Latinx population, as well as the Native American population, who are more likely to develop diabetes. We don't talk about that because there are not many Native Americans here, but we should. But let's talk about African Americans. African Americans are twice as likely to develop diabetes and high blood pressure, and thus are more likely to develop chronic kidney disease and end-stage kidney disease, requiring dialysis and/or transplantation. And so that's a great need there. And I don't go over all the stats for liver and others because we could take 2 hours. But it's important that we recognize that individuals, there's this great need. Individuals are dying on the waiting list, waiting for these organs, and we can donate these organs. Individuals can donate gift of life while they are alive. There, unfortunately, we're going to talk about this. There are reasons why we don't have enough individuals donating while they're alive. That's the best way of donating because those organs do well. Individuals, unfortunately, will die, and we have deceased donors, obviously, if they're dead, that we can use. That those deceased donors can occur in a setting of whether the heart is beating or whether the heart is non-beating. We can fairly characterize those, and you can imagine all the unfortunate tragic incidents which could lead to those type of donations. So I think it's important that we talk about this issue, particularly among the African American population. We understand why there is a need, and we start thinking about how can we then really expand the number of individuals, particularly in the African American community, who, if they need organ donation, feel that they have the agency, the information to go in and state, I want an organ, and those African Americans who can recognize that this is something that they can do. They can donate the gift of life while they're here on this earth. So this is an important conversation. I look forward to answering more questions about this.
Thank you so much for that. No, you're absolutely right. And I kind of think that plays into faith-based organizations, and it kind of harkens back to some of the first major hospitals began in faith tradition, which is something that we see today. And so there is an intersection between health and faith, and that is why we are here. And so I kind of wanted to pose an idea to all of you, just as faith participants and faith leaders, churchgoers here. I promise I do go. My grandma's watching, so I do have to say that. But thank you. How do you have these conversations? How do you start these conversations? What do people say to you in terms of their health and organ donation? Or how would you talk to someone in your congregation about that, or as a person who recognizes their faith or is deeply religious, like having those conversations with other people in your church, and what role does that play in healthcare? So for you, Dr. Ross, if you see that, for our rabbi and our pastors, our representatives as well, like what are the conversations that you're having around faith and healthcare, and organ donation? Does that come up at all for you? Do people talk about that? Is that something that you address ever in any sense?
I'll answer quickly, and I'll turn it over to our faith leaders here. So it doesn't come up as much as it used to. Back in 1991, when I was a part of this national effort, we had a coalition of faith leaders across the spectrum. And this was guided by Dr. Clive Callender, who was a major leader in organ tissue transplantation based in Howard University in Washington, D.C. And so we got together Christian leaders across the spectrum of Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, you name it. And we got all those leaders in DC, and they sat around a panel that was convened by the Surgeon General at the time. And they said unequivocally, there's no religious deterrent to organ transplantation. And that was important, and that was impactful. And that resonated across the country, that response. And so as a nephrologist, when I approach my patients about needing a transplant, that doesn't come up as nearly as much as it did back, in 1990. But it's there, but I don't think that we have we fortunately have done a lot of discussion, and a lot of informing the public. And so I think we've done well. I certainly know that Mid-America Transplant has been on the forefront of really taking this information at heart. I mean, obviously with Reverend Mcpherson, with Anthony here, I call you Anthony, sorry, here, we've taken this to heart. And so I think that we've made inroads.
No, yeah, that sounds fantastic. Do we want to hear from anyone else?
Sure, I would love to share. I think within the Jewish tradition, we're still doing a lot of educating around organ donation. And this comes down to misconceptions as to whether or not it's okay, according to Jewish law, to donate organs. And so we're educating, saying, yeah, it's good. And it's not even that, it's a mitzvah. It's a good thing to do. It's a commandment, because what you're doing is the potential to save a life is going to override any other thing that might stand in the way. And so we're just making sure that our communities are still aware of that, because we have a lot of living donors and a lot of living donor needs. And so being able to keep that education going and to just keep the conversation open has been really important within our communities.
And to also add to that perspective, I mean, it was a really rich question that you asked. And so, no, it was rich. That's all it was. It was a rich question. And so just taking like a segment of that, and how do we interlock and interpose into the lives of others? I think one of our messages has to be from our faith-based community is something that Jessica said, which was doing good. How do we do good for one another? And that your goodness can also be in a legacy. And that legacy also looks like, when I leave this earth, or while I'm still present, how can I contribute to a life of another person while I'm alive, and donate when I am, no longer on this earth. And so when we look at that doing good aspect from the Christian perspective, right? Galatians 6:9 says to do good to everyone, especially the household of faith. But before it says the household of faith, it just simply says do good to everyone. And when we understand what doing good is, and really moving in that perspective and adding that aspect of our faith to our practice, I think it helps join those missing pieces of what it means to donate, right? And what it means to practice faith together. Just as the Apostle James said, he said, listen, paraphrasing, he said, it's one thing to say you'll pray for a person. It's another thing to say you'll pray for a person and you actually have the resources. So don't just say, I'll pray for you because you're hungry, but you have food. No, tell them I'll pray for you, but I have a sandwich to give you, right? And again, I'm paraphrasing. That it's one thing to be a hearer of the word. It's another thing to be a doer. And when we do, it should be good. It should be a practice. And so I think using that vein, one of those veins in this in particular, to say, hey, how can you do good outside of the common aspect of missionary work or evangelistic work? Have you thought about the life of another person and how you contribute to that in a long lasting, effective way if you have the means to do so. So I think that's just one message and one way to convey it. How do you do good and how do you interlock that faith? And does scripture gives us credence to be able to do so? And I guarantee you it does.
Hey, let me also jump in and just expand on the base where Pastor Young was speaking. Look, I'm a child of the 70s. I grew up and I was in church 7 days a week, right? I was in revival, vacation Bible school. I mean, just all the time, and never ever did I hear any pastor broach the subject of transplantation. It wasn't talked about, and I make that point to just say to what Pastor Young said. They talked about doing good. I mean, that's the basic foundation of churches, to do good towards others. But no one ever got specific about what good is and what does it look like. And so as I progressed from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s, particularly in the 2000s, you start seeing an evolution of the pastors in what they were preaching about and in what they were teaching about. And they got specific, and they got almost to the point of, because as we know, if a pastor said to his congregation or to her congregation, it becomes priority. And so when they speak, then it carries weight. There's a certain gravity to it. And so in the 2000s, you start seeing a little bit movement, and that ties into what Dr. Ross was saying. I never heard of anything in my community, in my church, and I went to church religiously. No one ever talked about it. You know, you knew people were sick, and obviously hypertension is not new to African Americans. Diabetes is not new to African Americans, and you would see people. You would attend their funerals. You would know that they were sick and shut in, and you would ultimately attend their funerals. But you just, oh, he died because of diabetes, or she died. No one ever said that that person could have been saved, or they had kidney issues. And so the fact that we're evolving it will lead to the lessening of these numbers. And these numbers are still terrible, but we're making great strides in doing forums like this, and the work that you all are doing. And so I would parallel this with COVID. Everybody knows what COVID is, the coronavirus. Everyone knows what it is. And it's not until it hits home that you really wake up and be like, oh my God, it's been out there now for over a year, and it's corona. You turn on CNN, you turn on your local news, you know that it's a killer, but it's not until it hits your home that you really appreciate the fact this thing is no joke. And that's the case it was with me. Hypertension, kidney on dialysis. We had heard of dialysis, but it wasn't until it hit me that my immediate family, that my nuclear family began to say, oh, wow. And then they began to get educated about kidneys and dialysis and transplantation and all those things. And so when it hits home, you educate yourself. And once you educate yourself, it grows exponentially, because your immediate family deals with it, and then they tell others, and others tell others, and it grows. So that's the impact I've seen. I think I said this on the last webinar that we did, that all my family signed up the back of their license because I went through it. No one had done that prior to, and we knew the stats, some of them, the statistics, but it wasn't until it became personal that you feel like I got to do something about it. So I think those two things together go a long way.
And Corin, not to belabor the point too much longer, but I think Chris makes Senator Belt makes a great point, and that point is, especially when it comes to faith-based within the African American community, the only time the information about transplant, donation, or etc. comes up is when one of our members is then going through at the moment. And the most information we get is, I went to the doctor, this is what they told me, and now I have to wait. And the end result that usually happens with the church is, I'm going to be praying for you. And that's where the information stops. That's where the dialogue stops. And then if there's a testimonial service or whatever, they come back and give a report, and then that's where it stops. It's not how can we get active or how can we get involved. And it goes right back to Senator Belt's point until it hits home. And I've been pastoring for years now, and I've had members who were on wait lists. I've had members who didn't get what they needed and had to have a second transplant, especially when the kidney failed the second time. And so as a pastor, I have personally been involved in those situations. And even then, I didn't even know where to start. And so I think that's why forums like this and what Dr. Ross said about you all being at the forefront of these kind of issues, it makes a large difference. And I literally mean a large difference, because even though this seems like a drop in the pond, the prayer is it makes a ripple effect. And so that we can move past the just, I'm praying for you, but how do we become proactive, which is what we're doing now. And how when I am able to be in person again, or use our avenue of social media to get our information, just like I shared tonight, to say, hey, there is more that we can do about a concern that actually hits our home repetitively. And there is more we can do than just pray. We can actually be active, and someone may have a heart to actually step up, but they won't have a heart to step up if they don't have any information on what to do. So how can I be convicted to do something and I have never gotten information to be convicted on or about, if that makes any sense?
So one point to the point that everyone has spoken about, Pastor Young, Dr. Ross and the senator, it really comes back to education and awareness are critical components to make a difference, and also dispelling myths, which we all know, comparable to you, the senator, in terms of growing up in the church and hearing the myths. It's amazing, and unfortunately, some of them still continue. And so that opportunity to dispel them, get the education out there, and inform families, even though the guidelines have changed and in terms with donations, still having that family buy-in and having the family understanding makes all the difference in the world. I'm looking now at Dr. Ross, when you're in the hospital talking, and you're, talking to the patient, talking to the family, for a potential educational opportunity, for donation, in terms of for living donation. Just having that information makes a big difference.
When you make that, I appreciate that statement. And I'm thinking about one recent encounter. And so I'm seeing about a 55-year-old, very healthy African-American man in my office, picture of health. And he walks in, and I sit down. I said, I don't have a whole lot of time to go over a whole lot of details with you. You have advanced stage kidney disease. You only have about 10% of your kidney function left. We have to start moving quickly. And that healthy, robust man broke down in tears, like a baby. He just started crying, and I had to console him. He said, Dr. Ross, no one ever told me. Now, he's been seeing a primary care physician. I mean, he has a stable employment. He's professional. He has a doctor. He goes to church religiously, and he said, Dr. Ross, no one ever told me that this was the case, and so I don't have a whole lot of time to build, relationships. I had to move quickly, and I appreciate what you're saying. If we just talk more about this, because as the rabbi just said, as the minister just said, we've all come together. We all know that that scripture supports this, but the limiting factor is that we just don't talk about it enough. And I wish I had. Now that gentleman's on the transplant waiting list, not yet on dialysis, still with 10% of his kidney function. but we could have made a lot easier transition for him if we had just given him the basic information.
Absolutely. I feel that's like what we're taking away from the beginnings of this conversation, is that we have to talk about it. And this kind of segues into my next question for our faith leaders. Do you create like sermons around health? Is there a way that you approach health with your congregations? I have my own experience of consulting my priest in certain situations, but I'm not well versed in religions outside of my own in terms of how that is approached. And I know that faith and health and like personal matters don't always come to light. So I'm not sure how you broach that, but any insight I think would be really great for our viewers.
Well, I'll start it off. I know for us at Impact, I am a fitness semi-fanatic. I'm in the gym maybe 4 to 5 days out of the week. Sometimes, Dr. Ross, some of my colleagues, they make fun of me and call me Reverend Buff. I am a health fanatic to an extent. And so
no one has ever called me Dr. Buff.
One of the things that we do, Corin, is that we use different avenues to promote health. We've encouraged people. We've partnered with one of our local gyms here, Club Fitness, for our members to get discounted gym memberships. We've had aerobics classes at one of our sites in Swansea, Illinois, where for over a month on Saturdays, we would do 2 sessions in our church if you couldn't afford a gym membership. This is as of late to exercise and to participate in. We also, during a certain segment, usually in November, but not this year, we do what's called practical app classes. And one of those classes we talk about health, because ultimately what it looks like in scripture is stewardship. How do you become a good steward over your life? Not just one particular area. And the holistic aspect of stewardship says, how do I manage well what God gave me? Because here's the one thing that we know about our bodies. This is the only one we're getting, right? At least on this side. And so what does that look like? It looks like be a little more cautious about how we take care of this temple of ours. Now, do I just do a sermon per se, as you kind of mentioned, hey, here's a sermon about health? No, the health part is added from my perspective in the realm of stewardship, just managing your life well, because ultimately the way you look, the way your health is, and etc., it is also a part of our testimony. Now, I know we all have different health conditions and etc., but the point is, do you put forth an effort and do you try? And so we do several different things concerning health at our church, and it doesn't just have to be with a sermon. For us, it's how do we do it practically to engage people, because when it comes to health, let's be honest, everyone on here knows it takes major motivation to get there, because it starts here. And if it doesn't, sometimes we need that push in our church. We have been decent in trying to make that happen.
Thank you for that. Rabbi Jessica, would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I think within Judaism, I mean, we're often talking about the same kind of things that you're talking about, Pastor Young. You know, the fact that this body is one that we need to protect and take good care of. You know, we're all of us are made in the image of God, and how do we walk the earth knowing that? And how does the way that we take care of our bodies reflect that as well? For me, you know, I'm always talking about health in terms of not only our spiritual health, but also our physical health and our mental health. And I think right now within the community, we're definitely pushing for taking care of our mental health during this COVID time, really reaching out to one another, making sure that our mental health is there. I don't have that many opportunities to give sermons and to preach in that way. But when I do, these are the themes that I'm always talking about. From every once in a while, I do go into synagogues and talk about these issues, just keeping the communication open. And within our communities, they really go to rabbis the way that you described that you would go to your priest, just with all questions related to all different types of health issues. The rabbis are just really there for counsel. So that's what we are here for.
Corinne, let me jump in here right quick. In terms of my health, I was diagnosed in 1996. And at that time, I was, as Pastor Ron said, I was a gym fanatic. I mean, that was my life, right? And I ran, I lived, and I mean, I would hop up in the middle of the night at 2 in the morning and start working out, and I lived that stuff. Now, but I was diagnosed in 1996 as my kidneys were failing. The creatinine level was going through the roof, and I just didn't understand what was going on. Matter of fact, I was at the gym when I put my arm in one of those blood pressure cuffs, and I was at an aneurysm level. Then it was 204/192, and I left the gym and went straight to the hospital. They admitted me. That's how I found out I had high blood pressure, from the gym. And so I say that to say I was doing it on this end, but my diet was awful. Back then I thought if I worked out, I didn't understand nutrition because I still ate everything I drank sodas, and just loading up on red meat because it gave you protein and protein muscles. Come to find out, that's one of the worst things you could do, as Dr. Ross will probably attest to, is protein with failing kidneys. And so I had to learn how to do all these things. I had to learn about nutrition when I just never knew anything about nutrition. And I think that's a big part of it too. What we're ultimately only what we put in our bodies. And so that's part of it. As we continue to educate, we got to look at the total picture as we move forward.
I'm so pleased to hear this from Rabbi Shafran and Pastor Ron, because I'm called to give talks at churches when they have a health week or whatever, and I always say that I can talk here for 30 minutes, but why isn't this part of the lesson? Why is it part of the presentation of the sermon on a weekly basis about living more abundantly? I mean, that's what it should be. I mean, if you can just take what Reverend Ron just said, and if you can just incorporate that into every church, I'm very sure that within a very short period of time, the rates of high blood pressure and diabetes will plummet in this country. We wouldn't have to deal with the trauma and the pain that Senator Belt just described. So this is a charge to all faith leaders, that health is part of living, and that message has to be, as Pastor Ron just said, that has to be part of a daily message or a weekly message by our faith leaders. And we could use a whole lot more of that. It would make my job a lot easier.
And Corinne, as a legislator, when we talked about this previously before we jumped on live, the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus has set forth an agenda dealing with issues, and one of the pillars is healthcare. And so we've heard about the disparities from Ms. Bishop and Dr. Ross in healthcare as it pertains to Black people. And we want to work as a caucus to help eliminate barriers and create access to equitable healthcare. And all of that starts with policy, but it also is about education and resources as well. And so, like Dr. Ross said, if we have more involvement with community partners and with faith-based leaders to continue to help us spread messages about the importance of healthcare and Black people having access to quality healthcare in terms of preventative care, and making sure that our communities are well equipped with information, we can help to, like Dr. Ross said, just turn things around in terms of the healthcare percentages for Black people and people of color.
Representative, that was really so timely. I know I was asked to come, and this is out of order a little bit, but to talk about prevention. But as we, have had this discussion, and it was something Dr. Ross said earlier when he was referencing one of his patients. And so when we look at prevention and what we offer, through NKFI, are some talking points for patients when they go to see their primary care provider. Okay, before they get to Dr. Ross, what are the questions? Do you know your family history? Are you aware of your family history? Do you know your numbers? And if you have a family history, are you sharing that, with your primary care provider? Because, for example, as we deal with, with kidney disease, it tends not to be on the basic panel that a primary care provider would necessarily run, unless there are other indicators such as high blood pressure, blood glucose, et cetera. So the point being, when you know that and you ask the key questions, as Representative Greenwood said, it starts, that's where it can begin. And then to the diet, the exercise that, that Pastor was talking about, the diet that the Senator was talking about. So for us, we have a licensed registered nutritionist on our staff, and available at no charge to work with patients, to have counsel. Obviously now this is through virtually, but just someone that they can kind of run by, how do you buy food, how do you purchase, and that gets into the whole food desert issue, which we could be there, forever. So, but it's relevant. So anyway, you can see I get impassioned on this and in making a difference as we look at that component, and as we further educate, because even with donation and kind of bringing it back to donation, particularly if you're talking about living donation and the opportunity, Pastor, you said about doing good, and the opportunity to continue to do good and give back. So in order to do a living, to be a candidate to be a donor, then you need to have a certain level of health that Doc could go through much better than than I can in terms of the expectation. So it really does come full circle.
That is amazing. Thank you guys for all of this input. And I kind of wanted that to lead into stories. I know that Dr. Ross and Ms. Burgess Bishop and Rabbi Shafran, Pastor Young, a lot of you have a close experience with this. And like you said, you didn't experience it until it hit close to home. And I know that we have learned so much about Senator Belt's story, but if there was anything you guys wanted to add about your own personal experiences in the proximity to organ donation, or to these conversations that you might have had through the work that you do each day, or in your own personal lives. I know that our viewers always love hearing a new perspective, because oftentimes those who are tuning into this are people who feel close to this issue as well. So
I have a story that I just share. I want to share with you. I'm laughing at it because it was tragic, but humorous. I had, well, not tragic, but it could have been. I had a patient who came to me. She actually was a minister, and who developed kidney disease. And I said, we need to get you on the transplant list. And she said, I don't have to worry about that, Dr. Ross. God's going to cure me. God's going to heal me. I'm not worried about this. So I'm going to get through this. I said, but okay, let's just keep talking about this. She would come back the next month and her kidney function would worsen. I said, I'm going to send you over to our transplant coordinators. We're going to get you listed. She says, no, I'm not going to do this. I mean, God is going to heal me. And then I got a call one night from a physician in Florida. Apparently she was she was there at a convention and collapsed. And they were trying to get some health records. And so I called and, I called them. I said, well, let me, get my secretary to send you records. She called, she did well, thank goodness. She had a seizure from severe, elevations of her waste products. So she actually called me. She said, Dr. Ross, guess what? Jesus said I should listen to you. So she said that. So I'm going to come back and we're going to work together. It shouldn't have gotten to that point where she had a complication. She was able to laugh about it. I laughed about it, but that could have been fatal. And so she came back, and I don't want to use her name because she's still active, in St. Louis. But she just stated, so sometimes God is talking to us and telling us where to go, and we just don't always want to listen. And so I always recall that story because it ended well.
So Corin, I just, and I can't hang out here because I will easily get frustrated. But I think Dr. Ross brings up a good point. And the reason why I can't hang out here because then you get off into a deep theological scope. But it still goes back to information. She eventually said, God bless her heart, that Jesus and I said we need to listen to you. And I think too that as church leaders, as faith-based leaders, that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. That believing, if we're going to believe in God for all things, that also means practicality. That also means common sense. That also means not looking for the exceptions to the norms, but also look for how God normally operates through doctors and etc. And so, Dr. Ross, I totally heard that narrative and story, and I just say that to say it's important too, as faith-based leaders, what we teach and how we teach, so that people can receive the information and process it practically and spiritually, because the two, believe it or not, actually go together.
Yes. Amen.
So I would like to go back to the first patient I ever saw as a chaplain. And this was a patient who actually was declared brain dead, and the family was approached about organ donation. And I remember sitting with the family as they were trying to decide what to do and what the next steps were. And I sat there and we went back and forth. What would their loved one want? Because there was no indication. They didn't sign that card on their driver's license. They didn't check the box. And all of a sudden, the next of kin had this moment realizing that they had a friend who needed a kidney. And in that moment saying, well, I know that this person needs it. So I want to make sure that my loved one's organs can be given to somebody else, so that these gifts can keep on being given. And I take this story with me wherever I go, and it really, it's held with me all these years. And from that moment, I got involved with organ donation at the hospital that I was working at. And the time it was not in Missouri, it was down south, sitting on the organ donation committee. And I know we got letters each time after somebody donated about how many people were helped. And that just is so amazing how one person can just keep on giving, how the lights can keep on being shined throughout the world. So that's something that I keep with me on a daily basis, these lights.
story I had shared, Corinne, I had shared with you in advance that I'd like to share with everyone. And it is of one of my board members who is a nephrologist. In fact, he had been a nephrologist for 40 years. He retired. His name is Dr. Gupta, and he became a living donor at 71.5 years of age. Just amazing. And as we're talking about Donor Sabbath and looking at the faith-based aspect, he practices Hinduism. And he indicated and has told his story that his faith really sustained him through that process of preparing himself to be the donor. He ran into Overall, he did very well. I believe he ran into perhaps one obstacle, with one of his results, again, through his faith and also with, following the guidelines, et cetera. He was able to push through that and met, I would say met that parameter he needed to meet to be a living donor. So that to me is so inspirational that at 71.5 years of age, he could be a living donor, and he and his recipient are doing well. So I just wanted to share that, thought that was very uplifting and encouraging story.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are some goals to be a living donor at 71. Oh, it's something to aspire to, I'll tell you that. Yes, what about you, Pastor Mcpherson? I know that you've been working with Mid-America for a while, and if you're on the board, like Dr. Ross or like me, have had the chance to participate in even just a few events, some of the stories that I've heard and the people that I've come across in the organization have been really inspiring.
So I'll share two quick stories. One, the years before I became involved with Mid-America Transplant, I was pastoring a church down in Southeast Missouri, and one of the members had been on the waiting list for years. And much like what Pastor Ron had said, when the church knew about it, we just said we would pray for her as she waited to get it. And I'm part of the Methodist tradition, and in the Methodist tradition, pastors don't get to choose where they go; they just get sent. And so I was sent, and I went, met the lady, and she was wrestling with her call into ministry, but also willing to help, but said she's on the waiting list. So she finally got the call one night. I had called her to ask her if she would do something for service. She's like, "Pastor, I can't. I'm on my way to St. Louis. I got the call." And so I congratulate her. And so at that time, I didn't know anything about organ donation because the church, we don't talk about that a whole lot or at all. And so I'm Googling, and thank God for Google, which sometimes can lead you to right information and other times not. But then I found out about organ donation and that process. So she's doing great now, and she's accepted her call, and she's now pastoring the church, and I'm not there. So then I got involved with Mid-America Transplant. That's where I was able to find out the information about organ donation. And then now serving as the community outreach liaison for Mid-America, went back to the church and to teach about and talk about some of those misconceptions and that process, what it was. Then, and also doing some of that work, was talking and another church, and met a woman who had lost her child. Her family had said when she was approached about donation, she's family said, "No, don't do it." And so she listened to her family and declined to donate her son's organs. But after hearing the process and hearing what can happen with it, she said, "I wish I would have known, because had I known, I would have said yes. I wouldn't have listened to my family, who was saying it out of fear, out of misconception." So it is just this whole discussion that we're having and the stories that have been shared. It's important that we talk, and not just on those moments when we gather for worship, but in those family conversations, in those dinners conversations, and those moments that we're hanging out with friends, to continue to tell the story, continue to talk and how great and wonderful this is, that not just when someone passes, but even with living donations are an option, because there are plenty of people who are sick. And important with that healthy living, churches are, for years, have been notorious about talking about health, but not practicing it, with those Sunday dinners and those repasses, with those foods that aren't healthy and the snacks and all of that. But we have to really practice what we preach. Healthier living. I'm grateful that now more churches are having healthier options in those moments, but we're still not there yet. We still have a long way to go. More churches, more people are talking about health, but again, we still have a long way to go. But there are too many people that are dying, too many people that are suffering in silence. And so I'm grateful for all of you that are participating in this webinar, those that are listening in, and those that are already having the discussion. And just continue doing it, and let's wrap it up a little bit, because people are suffering. Hopefully there'll be more people who will, like I said earlier, the woman who's now a pastor, who's got a kidney donation and doing well, like Senator Belt, who's doing well after the donation, and others of those who won't be like that mother who said, I wish I would have known, because had I known, I would have donated, because this would have been right up my son's alley. He was a giver, he was a leader, he would have wanted this, but I didn't know about the process, and I operated out of fear rather than out of my faith.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much for those moving stories. And just sort of to head towards the end of this webinar, I did want to address that nearly every major religion, and even minor ones, has a stance on organ donation. And those stances do gear towards supporting it. And a lot of it, they talk about a sacrifice for your neighbor or compassion for the end of life. And a question that I wanted to pose to each of our panelists is what the word compassion means to you, in what you do, in what you practice, in what you experience. I know that is just an overarching theme in terms of why this would be the conversation that you would have in faith. And we've heard from our faith leaders how important it is, whether it's stewardship or recognizing taking care of your body or helping your neighbor, just sort of what that means to all of you.
For me, I always, when I talk about compassion, I just to position it to passion. And for me, passion is that fire that burns inside of you for you. Dr. Ross if Dr. Ross retired today, he would still go out and teach and educate, because that's where his passion is. But compassion also is the fire that you have that burns outwardly for others. And so it's the kind of the same. One passion is the fire that burns inside for you, and compassion is that fire that you have for others. And so that you want to do for others, you want to champion for others, you want to promulgate for others, you want to advocate for others, you want others to do well, you want others to be healthy, and you go out of your way to do that. So it's real simple, that fire that burns outwardly for others.
And compassion for me would be understanding the conditions that my neighbors are in at the current time, and offering, like Senator Belt said, advocating for, support for, and showing some kind of relief to assist in the situation.
I really appreciate both of that. For me, because it's an extension of what the representative just said, too often we blame the patient. Say, it's your fault that you're obese. It's your fault that you have diabetes. It's your fault that you have high blood pressure. Compassion to me is understanding the circumstances, the situations that occur, the barriers, the structural barriers that prevented that person from accessing the right appropriate health, from accessing health information, from accessing fresh fruits and vegetables. We have to understand those things. And when you have that understanding, as Representative just said, you really have that level, high level of empathy. You understand that person. You can understand what that person is thinking, and you're more likely to support and be patient with that person because you know the conditions that are there. That's that agape love that we should talk more about.
And I think once we have that understanding of where people are coming from, being present with each person, it's the compassion of the divine within me is recognizing the divine within you, and being there.
Yeah, I think for me, the word compassion, I mean, I really take it at face value. And that's literally what it means to me. It's that word, common passion, right? Passion means literally what most people don't realize means to suffer, right? The passion of the Christ, to suffer with, come, right? To come along and suffer, to enter into, to have a heart that's merciful, that's compassionate, right? To come into that person's circumstance and enter into it and do it willingly, that has a heart and care for an individual. So I think just on the basis of that, man, the charity of it, the care, and just really being able to enter in and bear the infirmities of the weak. So.
Well, many of the points that have been made, for me, the compassion means or reflects in having that empathy and being moved to help and provide support. So that's what compassion. I empathize, and I am moved to work with, to help support, to try to make a difference.
I mean, the same for me. Compassion is about viewing the humanness, the humanity of others, and being able to sit with them and walk with them and allow them to be them, and while you can be you, and as we experience the greatness of life together and work towards making each other whole.
That was very nicely put. Thank you so much. If anyone has any final remarks that they would like to make, I want to extend a huge, gracious, unmatchable thank you to all of you for participating in this and kicking off Donor Sabbath on this positive note. I know just from the engagement that we've had so far, our viewers have loved to hear from faith leaders of different faiths and the experiences. I know about preventative health and the doctors and the representatives, and just sort of the impact that this is a priority for so many people that have such an impact on their community, I think is what is most important during this time. Because I know that health is it is the topic of conversation. This is where we're at, and there is no shortage of people on that organ donation waiting list. That we don't see that coming. So I think what you've been saying about preventative measures and getting out there to donate, I mean, these conversations are the conversations we need to be having. So, any final remarks?
Thank you for having us, this panel. And I look forward to the next one because it is important for us to continue to have these conversations and provide this information, dispel those myths, and get facts to our people.
The representative speaks for me.
I would echo those sentiments as well. Understand it's 8 of us on this panel, and there's power in one. My mom used to always tell me that one house on one street can change that street. One street can change a neighborhood. One neighborhood can change a city. One city can change a state. One state can change the nation. There's power in the 8 of us right here. So that's my message.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for participating. We will be adding links for sign up. I know links to the National Kidney Foundation of Illinois if you want to learn more about it. And if you have any questions that you want to ask our panelists directly, feel free to leave them in the comments and we can get them to our faith leaders and our doctor and provide any information that you may need in the future. Otherwise, I think that we're ready to wrap it up. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.